Other questions? Yeah, Paul.
I heard a description of Ephesians as not being an authentic writing of Paul himself or a dictation of Paul, but that that there's enough material there that it's Paul in because it's kind of a collection of phrases and thoughts and ideas from his earlier letters that can kind of be fleshed out. Does that make sense?
The word authenticity is such a tricky word. Think of the variations we play: author, authorship, authority, authenticity, and we connect truth with genuineness. It's not even that he cuts and pastes phrases. There are things that ring a bell, but are kind of reshaped. I mean, justification by faith, does that word, it's kind of driven home more in Ephesians than really some parts of Paul's own letters. Justification is, hit hard in Galatians and Romans, and the author of Ephesians, pushes on with that. So Luther will, quote Ephesians when he's looking for kind of a scriptural warrant for his emphasis. I don't know, am I responding to your question? I don't want to say it's, Paul is authentic and this is not.
Yeah, that's what kind of catches my attention when it's that cut and paste. We'll take some old Paul stuff and then we'll flesh it out with this new idea. I think I resonated when you said your description about its strength is in an appalling tradition, an apostolic continuity.
Well, and even claiming, notice Ephesians starts with Paul identifying himself as an apostle. Here we do have the challenge. The text itself claims Pauline authorship and the apostolic authority. What can I say about that? No, that's in the manuscript. The to the Ephesians is not in the first manuscripts, but the apostolic claim is. So, in a sense, was the author trying to put one over on people? Or was the author trying to say, this apostolic authority still stands today? There are examples of textbooks in the ancient world where students were asked to write in the style of so-and-so. Try to write in the style of Livy. Try to write in the style of Homer or of Aristotle. And maybe you've done that. You can kind of imitate the style. But it's not because you're forging a document. It's because that's one way you get into the mind of the author, I would argue. Yeah.
So, Phil, following up on that, if you are now the congregation who read the letter and he's dead, how would it be presented to the congregation? They would probably know he's dead.
That's a good question. And look at the time. That's a really good question. The question was, if this is written at a later time, people know Paul is dead. So how would this be heard? I think that's an interesting question. I have wondered, and others have wondered about that. I don't have a simple answer. But maybe part of the agreement within the community or the communities of Asia Minor, because these are also the churches of the Book of Revelation. That Ephesus being primary. Maybe they're going to hear this as someone authentically trying to keep that voice alive. First and Second Timothy domesticate Paul. They really take the edge off. I think Ephesians is trying to say, hey, Paul can, don't dismiss Paul as being, like that hymn, some live in sultry forest where apes swing to and fro. No, Paul is still alive and well in terms of the voice here. I don't know. What do you think, Rob?
Well, it would be kind of like a sequel.
Yeah.
That's the only thing I think of. You can either say we found it, it's a lost file, we found it at his desk. Or you could say, this is a sequel interpreted by somebody.
I like the idea of a sequel. No, as far as I know, it was never presented like, oh, look what we found. Isn't that an interesting coincidence? But I think the notion of a sequel makes a lot of sense. But again, that's a really good question. So that, did people hear this as a fraud? Obviously, the judgment of the church is this is not a fraud move because it comes into acceptance. I guess this notion of adapting messages to new times may have been part of the culture. Boy, I wish I knew more there. I think it's a really interesting question and a good proposal. Anyone else? Yeah?
Was the community as a whole, well, the same mind, or was each Ephesus and Corinth somewhat different, so that Paul is writing specifically to a mentality of a community instead of just a broad brush?
That's a really good. The question was, you're talking about the churches as a whole, where they have the same mind or not, and that's a really good and fair question. Again, my teacher, Johann Becker, wrote a book on Paul, and he used the model of coherence, namely, what is it about Paul that holds it all together, and contingency, how does it adapt to different settings? And I think Professor Shore talked about this. It's easier to find a coherent thought in the 7 undisputed letters, and at the same time contingency. That is, when he writes to Corinth, it's really talking to Corinth. He mentions names, he mentions issues that are particular to them. Philippians the same way. Philemon the same way. Names, people, kind of stuff. Ephesians, it's more broadly based. You can't nail certain people, and you can, insert your church's name here. And so there is, especially in the 7 undisputed, there is a contingency, a particularity, and I think Mary used the term, not contingency, but occasional. That is written to a particular occasion. Not occasional, not in the sense of every once in a while, but to a particular occasion. Does that speak to your concern? Anyone else? I think Ephesians is a rich text and an important part of the canon. And we do read a canon. We don't just select what we like. No, I privately do select what I like. No, but I think there's a sense in which the canon has a voice that speaks, so we need to listen to that voice. Anyone else? Wow, thanks for coming. Thanks for